What's an obvious sign someone's American? Story 1. In Salzburg, I went to grab something from the drugstore. As I was checking out, I said hello to the cashier, thinking there was very little difference between how I said it and how Austrians say it. She immediately started speaking to me in English, and I asked her how she knew I spoke English. She deadpan stared me in the eye and goes, "Hello." I just about died laughing since I'm a very stereotypical friendly American that says hello exactly like that. One of my favorite memories from that trip. Story 2. I'm an American and visited Venice several years ago. My exploration strategy was to take the least crowded road at every intersection. Eventually, I ended up in a completely non-touristy residential area with very few people, almost all locals, since I had no particular goal in mind except wanting to see as much of the city as possible. I was basically power walking between courtyards, hour or so in. I saw a church that looked interesting, started walking towards it, and two women my age approached me asking me a question in broken Italian. I told them in English, "Sorry, I don't speak Italian." They were American and trying to ask for directions. Story 3. I'm American. Years ago, like 25, I visited Europe for a few weeks in the summer, got really tired of drinking warm or room temperature beverages. Finally, one day in a German restaurant, I spoke just enough German to ask for ice in my Coke. It took them a while to understand, why does crazy girl want ice in this perfectly fine Coke, and they returned my glass of warm soda with one lonely little ice cube floating in it. It quickly melted, but the servers were so proud. Story 4. I spent 2 weeks in Taiwan asking the waitstaff after every breakfast for a cup of ice. I would then proceed to make iced tea in my flask, while they watched in fascination, so I could have a cold drink all day. It was July. You'd think they'd have ice around all the time. Story 5. I dated a European man here in the US. When we walked together, every time I made eye contact with someone on our path, I would smile at them, and they would always smile back. Boyfriend was so confused at all these strangers smiling at me, kept asking if I knew all these people. It was hilarious. Story 6. We're conditioned to fill spaces evenly. I noticed when I worked delivery, spending lots of quality time on elevators, that for every new person that enters, everybody shuffles to even things out. Similar thing plays out in social gatherings and bars. Not sure if that's universal or not, but I find it interesting. I think the size of our personal bubbles is because our spaces are generally much larger because we've got the space, to build bigger buildings, sidewalks, roads, etc. Might also explain why we're louder, used to filling larger spaces with volume. By contrast, I've noticed people from East Asia on the other end of the spectrum have seemingly, to me, no concept of personal space and have no problem entering my sacred bubble of personal space. I'd imagine it's just due to living in denser conditions. Story 7. I love this. Body language is both universal and cultural, even expressions and gestures. If you watch a muted recording of two individuals, one from the US and one not, you can still tell them apart. I wonder what people learn when trying to act American. Little stuff like leaning on things is so freaking fascinating, but it would also come naturally eventually as you acclimate. I guess those agencies such speed up the process by making you conscious of it. Story 8. To quote a Latvian woman I met at a hostel, you hear them coming like the thunder, more often than not. If they're talking and laughing louder than everyone else, they're American. Edit. I love my American neighbors. Sorry if I sounded rude. Canadians are also pretty loud when we get going, and New Yorkers are a different breed. Their regular talking voice absolutely booms over everything else. Makes sense when you have to be heard over the 1000 dB noise pollution. The bars in NYC are brutally loud. I feel like an old person saying this, but I just never liked going someplace with people, meeting them in person, only to not be able to communicate with them. Story 9. I'm an American that has traveled a lot and lived in other countries. Most of my experiences come from being in African countries. After being away for a while, American tourists are easy to spot. It's not usually one characteristic, but the right combo of several. The obvious ones are American sports jerseys. American women tourists were easy to spot in some African countries because they wore very short shorts, where showing a thigh is often something that's less appropriate for locals. For men, wearing shorts, because local men didn't wear shorts unless they're playing sports. I met several British and other Europeans and Australian tourists, and they seemed to be wearing jeans or khaki pants, even when it was hot. Maybe it was a custom left in those countries from British colonialism. Or maybe they're better at understanding customs before traveling to other countries. Americans tend to be loud, but so do many Europeans. But obviously I can easily pick up on an American accent. Story 10. I will say that Americans tended to be kinder to locals, while British, and some other Europeans, weren't outright rude, but seemed to be more comfortable with recognizing classes of people. Example, Americans would joke and small talk with taxi drivers, people carrying bags, employees at restaurants, etc. This isn't to say all Americans are kind and all British are rude, because obviously Americans can be assholes and Europeans can be sweethearts, but it's just what I observed, and the default stereotype, Americans can be fatter. British men who were overweight seemed like they carried it in their gut, but Americans, from what I saw, just carried extra weight all over. After being away from America for 2 years, when I came back, seeing the amount of overweight people was more eye-opening. Story 11. When I moved to America, I was like, they sound like how they are in the movies. I had no idea that was Americans' real accent. I really like it. Thought, okay, it seems I have to explain myself a little. No, I didn't really think your accents were completely fake. I thought maybe it was dramatized for movies like a lot of things are. Some European movies the actors do put on a fake accent also. So my idea of an American accent was different from what it actually is. A lot of people, Americans, think my accent is fake, so I don't appreciate being called dumb. I just experienced extreme culture shock when moving here, and the accents were a huge part of my experience. Story 12. All the states have individual unique accents, to some degree or another. If you put people in the same room from Boston, New York, Dallas, and California, you will hear the difference. The difference may be that the ones encountered outside the USA do not carry such a heavy internal accent like the more localized groups. Just my own speculation though. Story 13. I'm from the southern states and sound like cornbread when I talk. Most of my family has never left the state they were born in, and we definitely aren't upper class or European seeming in any way whatsoever, but I've had several people from outside the US comment on my table/eating utensil etiquette. I don't switch the knife, but I believe it's because I was born a lefty and forced into being a righty. I never knew this was a thing. I feel like all those comments make sense now, haha. Story 14. Most Americans don't say they are from America. They usually use the United States or the US. Usually they use American only to refer to their nationality. Sometimes America will be used humorously/sarcastically. In my experience, usually non-Americans use America to refer to the country. As for why this is, I don't know. Story 15. An obvious sign that someone is American is the way they dress. Americans tend to wear running shoes, shorts, and t-shirts, and they often leave large tips. Even in countries where tipping is considered an insult, Americans also tend to stand at the entrance of a restaurant waiting to be seated, as hostesses are rare outside of the US. Americans are also known for their loud speaking volume, as well as their tendency to smile a lot and ask "how are you" when introducing themselves. Finally, Americans often get confused when there are no public trash cans and ask for the restroom instead of the toilet.